in this episode.
Would you guys say that this is a fair statement? Players have to be developed to a certain point to play at the Division I or professional level. Those coaches don't want to develop certain skill sets. You have to have a baseline before you can actually play there.
Yeah, I think it's part of it, especially at the higher levels of Division I. Those guys, anymore with coaches' salaries, facilities, it gets back to the bottom line, and that's winning baseball games. And at that level, Big 12, SEC, Big 10, PAC, whatever, those guys need to win baseball games or you're not going to be coaching at those schools. So you can't really take that project kid like you probably could a while back and develop them. And you see the guy can hit it 1,000 miles, but he stands on his head and hits. Well, he can hit it 1,000. I'm going to teach him how to really hit. Well, you don't have the time to do that anymore.
Let's finish it.
How's it going, everyone? Spiker here. We were fortunate enough to bring on a man I highly respect. He is someone who has had an excellent track record as a coach. I wanted to bring him on and have a dynamic conversation around building team structure, being an effective communicator, and I also wanted to talk to him about nutrition. I brought on Evan Pratte as well on this episode because I want parents and players to hear how the relationship works between a high school spring coach and a college coach. Sometimes we can assume things about how things work, and having them both in the same room helps clear the air on what the relationship is really like and how college coaches find players. I also separated this conversation into 2 episodes. The second part will be releasing this upcoming Tuesday. If you're a person 10 years into the future listening to this, one, you can listen to the part 2 now. And also, I hope you're watching this in your autonomous flying car in Mars. The first episode will be all about coaching people, and the second part will be all about nutrition. Please give us a review on Apple Podcast. Also, you can now give us a rating on Spotify. Please do this. This is super important. Lastly, I decided not to do the video for this episode. Actually, it wasn't my decision. I totally messed up the footage. It happens. Have to admit the mistake when it is made. But anyways, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. We have two channels, The Closing Pitch and The Rawlings Tigers. If you could subscribe to them both, that would make me feel so good, and it would also make me look a little bit better to Jaws. But anyways, thanks, and I will catch you on the other side. What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of The Closing Pitch. My name is Spiker Helms, and in this show, we have a special guest, Scott Brown, and then also subbing in, pinch hit at bat, Evan Pratte is back in the seat, in the saddle.
I'm excited.
I'm excited for this because I was thinking about this, and I was going to ask you anyways today to jump on this podcast, even if Dave was here, because I think it's going to be interesting because we have a former high school coach who has dealt with a lot of D1 athletes, a lot of professional athletes, and then you were at the Division I level. So I think that this dynamic is really going to help clear the air on a lot of things for parents and players, and kind of see how the communication lines are between you guys and how it actually all works out. So I'm really excited about this. Scott, do a brief intro, kind of give your background, how you've got to this point. Guys, just to let you know, he works for Phorm, which is here in St. Louis. The headquarters is here, and it's what, a $300 million company, $400 million company. It's massive.
It's a lot more than I make. I know that. So it is somewhere in those lines.
Yes. It's a supplement company,
and growing quite a bit.
Yeah, you're on the fast track. You're building another facility as well.
They're building 2 more buildings to go along with the one that they just built 2 years ago, and they've already outgrown it. They thought they were hoping to make it for 10 years out of that one, and they've actually outgrown it in 2 years. So they are growing by leaps and bounds.
Oh, and it's interesting because you had this super successful high school career, and then you're now into like the private space and helping out Phorm. Kind of give your background on coaching and how you've gotten to this point.
Okay, I'm a 84 graduate of Vianney High School and played college baseball, and was fortunate enough that I got to play a couple of years in the Pirates organization. Learned a lot, knew that it was not what I was going to do for the long long term. I knew that my days were numbered, but I really wanted to have an experience of playing pro ball, and that was one of the neatest things I've ever done in my life. Got on at CBC right after I got done with playing. Was there for 20 years. I am very fortunate that I happen to be the all-time winningest coach there still. Mason will pass me pretty soon, but for now, I'm holding on to that title. And then after 20 years there, I was there for 11 years at Vianney High School as well too. And again, I happen to hold the distinction of being the winningest coach there as well. So pretty proud of that accomplishment. Ended up with around 570 something wins, I think it was, in my career. Won a state title, been to the Final Four 6 times. I think the thing I'm most proud of, though, is in my 28 years as a head coach, I think it's 181 players that I've had that have gone on to play college baseball at some level, whether it's junior college, Division I, Division II, or Division III level, or NAIA. And yeah, that with all the stuff I've done this summertime, I've coached a lot in the summer as well, from my kids when they were growing up to I've done about 7 years in the Metro Collegiate League and actually coached for 2 years with the Gateway Grizzlies as well too. So it's been a lot of fun over the years.
How many guys ended up making to the big leagues?
Mm-hmm.
I think when you consider everything, I want to say it's 3 or 4.
3 or 4.
3 or 4 that have made it all the way up.
It's
And
always
most-
it's always an amazing number with coaches, and how many guys get to the big leagues, and you say 2 or 3, but the impact of your coaching and over the years of gazillions of kids. Okay, 3 got to the big leagues. Well, that's pretty good. It's not like just like,
yeah, like when you hear that
0.
number, like, oh, 3?
No,
Like,
3.
no, that's a really good
that's
number.
really awesome.
You're absolutely right. I mean, even when you look at the Division I level and stuff where you were at for so many years, I mean, the number of people that have actually made it all the way up there still is rather small when you consider all the kids that have gone there. And that is the elite level as well, too. And how many kids don't make it, but how many kids you have an impact on is huge. And, and what you do, because as I've always said with everybody is, I may not have everybody go on and play college baseball, but they're all going to be, at one point or another, they're going to be a person who is an employee or an employer. They're going to be a husband. They're going to be a father. And hopefully I've had an impact on them to where that some of the things that we've done, that we've taught them, will pay off for them, and they'll learn from it.
And guys, Vianney and CBC are high-powered programs here in the St. Louis area. And if you think about your area, you're probably thinking of like, oh, that high school, this high school is one of the best programs in the city. That's how it is here in St. Louis. CBC and Vianney are really well known for their baseball programs, athletic programs. And so with that tailoring in and kind of that little brief history for them, how do you approach a season? How did you approach the process when it came to each year as a high school coach and dealing with knowing, hey, I could have a high-powered team this year, or I'm going to have a not as talented group? How do I actually rack off those wins?
Well, as I've talked about, I mean, Vianney, we were very, very successful. I mean, because over my 10 years that I was there, because I was 10 years as head coach, because we had the COVID year in there as well, too, that we didn't get to play, which would have been probably one of my better teams that we had. I mean, because we had 12 kids that year that were going to go on and play college baseball. But our thing is that we, and not to sound cocky, but we knew we were going to be pretty good. And we knew we were going to be really good. And I always gave that as a challenge to them, because I want to say there was probably about 3 or 4 of those years that we were actually in preseason ranked number 1 in the state. And I used to always challenge them. It's like, you deserve that. You earned that right. Now it's your job to go out there and live up to it. So it was never anything that we tried to back away from, because you can't. It's something where some coaches will try to avoid stuff with rankings. I always told them to take it as a challenge. You use that for more incentive to get better, because everybody else is going to be going after you. And it's, if you've earned it, great. But in preseason, it's, as I always tell them, that you haven't really earned anything. It was the team last year that really earned things.
Would you rather have a target on your back, or would you rather be the underdog?
For me, it really didn't matter, because my job as a coach, the thing that we always stress was getting better every day. And it doesn't matter where you are, it is your job on that particular day is to go out there and get better. and obviously different teams are going to be able to reach different levels. But it was always talking about raising the bar in practices, making sure that they went after it and got after it and made themselves better. And the teams that really bought into it were able to get to the highest level they possibly could. And like I said, I was fortunate that we won one state championship, made it there 6 times. So I guess 1-5 isn't necessarily a great record when you look at it.
But still,
it was,
the consistency. I always say
Yeah.
it's the consistency more than anything. Like, yeah, if you rattle off that one championship, but then you don't make it the rest of the time, it's like you don't have the opportunity to actually win more.
Right.
So,
and my thing to them was always, look, you're sort of the keeper right now. And it was how I sort of took it as well, too, because being a graduate, there's a lot of kids that I really looked up to when I was a sophomore playing on varsity. And I always told our kids, you owe it to those players that have played before you that have really laid the groundwork to give it your best shot, to make sure you go out there every day and work hard. That's what they did. That's what you should expect of yourself. And then in the future, that's what you should expect for the people down the road as well, too. So it was sort of the mindset that we had of, we are an elite program, as you said. We had one of the better ones, which was really neat. It was no different than when Evan was at Lafayette for all those early years with Coach Swift. They were unbelievable. The kids that they had going through there. And it was sort of a challenge to live up to those expectations because you didn't want to let those players down. And that's sort of what I always stress to our guys is go out there and give it your best every day.
now, were those programs in the spot, did you basically adopt that spot that they were in? They were already a good program, or was it a program that was just kind of middle of the road or lower tier?
As I've always said, I was very fortunate. I followed Steve Beezer over at Vianney, and Steve did an unbelievable job over there. Mm-hmm. And I was very fortunate that he knew how things were for me at the time, and he was the one that sort of talked to Dan Borkowski about maybe suggesting them to talk to me to see if I'd be willing to come back to my alma mater and be the coach. And it was a perfect time to do it, and I was quick to jump on it. And so with that, they had won in 2004 and 2006. They were state champions. So, and they had a great team with Jason Haggerty, Josh Seiberg, Jimmy Clockey, Nick Schmidt. All people that most of them that Evan was probably recruiting when he was up at Mizzou. Mm-hmm. And so they already had a really good program. My job, as I always said, was to keep it going what he had. I wasn't going to change anything because Steve was a good coach, and it wasn't like I had, take things apart and rebuild it. It was just, hey, this is what he was going to do if he was still here, and this is my job to just keep things going.
One of the nuts and bolts things that I've always wanted to ask a really good high school coach and the limitations of a high school coach. You got the spring season. How do you keep your program, your flow, your energy throughout the entire year when they're playing football or soccer or basketball? I know those kids are limited in practice times, and I know the Misha kind of loosened the rules up a little bit this year for the high school coaches to be able to work with those kids. Back before, you couldn't do that. How do you keep that going in the off season? Do the kids get together themselves? Do you have workouts in a weight room, or how do you keep that flow going when you're not around your kids very much?
Our thing was, and you're right, I would have loved to have seen how it was now that they're able to have some hours of practice per week. But my whole thing was a couple different things. One, I was really big in believing that the weight room was really important because I saw all the kids that went to college and were playing and how they come back. And obviously we'll talk about that more later, but it was something that, they completely changed. And lifting weights and being a strong player is something that seems important to the high school player. It's important to the college kid, and it's what they're going to do if they keep on playing. So my thing was we had a program. I didn't make it mandatory, but I encouraged the kids to go, and the kids sort of saw the kids that came back from college, and they knew this was something that was expected of them that they were going to have to do. And since we had so many kids that were going to go to college, they sort of bought into it. But I felt that was one of the biggest things to build relationships in the weight room. I was a much better coach when I was at Vianney than I was at CBC. When I was young, it was still just trying to learn things, keep my head above water. The one thing that the kids at Vianney, and I will say one of the first persons I met there was a kid named Ryan Snyder, was to be a little bit more open with them, that it's okay to be not necessarily buddies with them, but to be a little bit more of yourself. And it's okay to joke around with them a little bit and allow them to see a little bit more of you. And that way they open up a little bit too, and you get to learn a little bit more about them. And so my thing was to build the relationships in the weight room. And then the other thing is that a lot of coaches will complain over and over again about the fact that, their kid plays for this team or this organization, they're trying to do this or that. And for me, I just embraced it. It was like, you know what? I want you to play for the best team you possibly can. I want you to make sure you challenge yourself to get better. I'm not going to tell you who to play for. I don't care who you play for, because that's got to be a decision with you and your family. But for me, it was just to not knock anything with that, but just sort of embrace it. And then when they got back, I sort of knew a little bit about what each program was about and what they did with whether it was pitching or for hitting. And in turn, it wasn't necessarily to just go in there and start changing things, but when they sort of had some problems, now I sort of knew some of the things that they were being stressed, that was stressed to them in the off season. So I would go ahead and hit on those things as far as like, look, you got to get back to this point right here because you're away from it.
Did you ever deal with players that were like fighting you on certain thoughts and philosophies because of being like the 3-sport athlete or the clubs or the instructor that they go to?
A couple things. One, as far as the 3-sport athlete, I've always said you get one chance to go through high school. If you want to play another sport, play it. Because I think what you can learn to be competitive, if you're on the free throw line and have to make 2 free throws to tie a game up or go ahead and you got 5 seconds left, or you have to make a block in football and you're on the 1-yard line, those things, they're going to come back and they're going to help you compete in baseball as well too. But again, you get one chance to go through it. I'm not gonna be the person that tells you you can't play something else. If you decide that you want to focus on baseball, great. But I had enough kids that also played other sports that it was okay. If they were going to be good enough to play, they found time to do things. They found time to play catch to get their hitting in. So that was important. I mean, one of my best players I had, Nick Allgaier, who just had a cup of coffee last year with the Blue Jays, played hockey in the wintertime, played football in the fall. And so his big thing is I always knew he was going to have a better chance of being better later on when he was able to focus a little bit more on baseball. But he was good enough that it didn't matter. I mean, in high school, he was able, because of his athleticism, because of his ability to compete, he was going to be successful.
So it wasn't like if they played 3 sports, like you didn't try to steer them like, oh, if you would focused on baseball, you could probably make it to Division I baseball. You really thought of it as, well, what's the best suit for that kid?
I always said this. Did anybody tell Mike Trout that he couldn't play basketball? And I think he did okay. And I think that's the thing that's really difficult is that, when you're in a city like St. Louis, there's a lot of competition for things. And there's a lot of people that are going to try to talk you out of doing more than one sport and focusing more on this, whether it's soccer. And I've lost kids that have been told that they need to focus on soccer. That would have been great baseball players. And I always felt bad for them, not necessarily for the team because there's other team people that were able to step up. But I felt bad for the kid because he missed out on that chance. And even my own son, Matt, he still sort of says that one of his biggest regrets is he wished he would have continued to play hockey when he was in high school. He played his freshman year when he was at CBC, but then when we came to Vianney, he gave it up, and he's like, I really wish I would have played with my brother. And but that was his decision. It wasn't anything that I had to do with it. But I wasn't going to be the kid. I wasn't going to be the coach that made you quit something. I wanted you to enjoy it, and hopefully they had the respect to then give me a little bit more when I ask them for it as well.
You can get specialized once you get to college. But that's what you're going to do. That's what you go to college for. Be a kid. Always the same thing when I was recruiting. Be a kid. Have fun. You want to do it? Do it. Fire it up.
I would assume that the culture would actually get a lot stronger because you're giving people freedom rather than trying to put them into a box. I would assume that your culture was very strong because of that.
It was a choice for them to play. And again, it was one of those things where I always told them, the worst day I have of the entire year is the day that I have to make cuts. And I think that's one of the things that I am most grateful for this year. Is this first time in 30 years that I don't have to make cuts. And I hated that. But then we always talk to those kids afterwards. And because I always talk to everybody individually, whether it was a kid who made it, whether it was a kid who I had to tell him that his time was over with. But the kids that were remained, we had a talk as a group, and always talk to them about one, you know, you need to make sure you look out for those friends of yours that didn't make it, but also you need to understand that now there's a little bit more expectation on you. There's some people in the hallway who really wanted to be a part of Yanni baseball and aren't because of the fact that they just didn't quite have as much talent as maybe some of the other kids. I said, so you owe it to them to make sure that you're working extra hard. I said, because again, you know, they would have loved to have had that chance. So don't let that slip away from you.
So you met with every single player after tryouts?
I did. Every year, other than my first couple. And a guy named Bob Ryan is the one that convinced me of that. And it was, we actually did football together, and then we did baseball as well, too. And we were doing freshman football. And we actually talked to every single freshman football player as well, too, on the day of cuts. And we talked to them about, you know, thanking them for coming out, or, you know, thanking them, and we'll see you the next day and make sure you're ready to go. But, yeah, I learned that was important. He stressed to me as a young coach that, look, you know, you probably have never had to be cut. And I said, no, I did. I got cut when I was in the minor leagues. I said, it wasn't any fun. I don't care if you're 18 or whether you're 22. I said, it's not fun. And he said, right. He goes, you need to make sure you remember that as well, too. He goes, and you need to look those kids in the face, explain to them why they didn't make it, and make sure you never forget that, because you don't want to ever do it where it just doesn't mean anything to you, and that you're able to just tell a kid that he's not going to be able to make it.
So you never put down a list. You just basically, you said, all right, tryouts are done. Now we're going to have meetings. And then you went through each player.
Yep, face to face. And it was
time is the most valuable asset. That's what kind of speaks to me, is like, if a coach would do that to me, it would be like, man, I really hate that he cut me, but God, I love him. I mean, that's what it's like, a love-hate like type of feeling.
It's hard because, I mean, you look at those kids, and I will tell you this, there was some kids that I wasn't sure what I was going to do, and it was a little bit more of, okay, when I get to the face-to-face with them, of exactly what they're going to tell me. And that was a make or break whether they were going to make it or not, because it was sort of, they were on the bubble, they were going to be one of the bottom guys, but there's a couple kids that, I can remember a kid named Scott Hare over at CBC that, I mean, as he came in, he goes, Coach, I want to tell you something first. He goes, before you start talking to me. I said, okay. He's like, I know I did not have a really good year of practice, or a good week of practice here at tryouts. And I said, and as a senior, he goes, I know that probably means that I'm probably going to get cut, because he didn't play as a junior. And I said, no, I go, you really struggle quite a bit. He goes, I understand that. He goes, but being a part of this really means something to me. He goes, and I promise, if you give me a chance, I will work hard. Whether I ever get a chance to play or not, I will make sure I work hard, and you won't regret keeping me on this team. He goes, but I also know that because of how I did, there's a good chance that you're going to have to cut me. I said, well, you just convinced me to keep you. And he was the last kid to get in a game. He got in a game because one of the kids fired a helmet, and one of our rules is you don't fire helmets. Yeah. And so he got in, and you know, he hit one ball pretty hard, and he ended up, I grounded out on something else, and by the next game, the other kid had still not apologized for firing the helmet, so he was sitting again, and all of a sudden he got a dink hit here, and he hit one really hard to an outfielder, and it was like, you know, he's just sort of making things happen. He got on with another infield hit as well, too. And it was what he did the rest of the year. And he ended up being first team all DH in the MCC.
No way.
And he was that close to being cut. But he stuck with it, and he was a great teammate. He was a DH for us. And
I guess that's how you figure out if the person has the intangibles or they don't. Because, like, if you go face-to-face with a coach, just putting yourself in a high school position, like, I mean, there's a lot of kids out there that are
passion is a beautiful thing.
Well, yeah, but they're
beautiful thing. Give
like,
me 1,000 of those guys, we'll win every game.
Yeah,
but like kids are like scared of adults majority of the time.
Exactly.
So it's like when I come from the varsity coach, it's like I'm gonna tell you how I really feel, and that's gonna show you he has the it.
He did, and my thing as a coach is, I think one of my I always tell people this. One of my biggest strengths was I'm smart enough to know that I don't know everything. and I make mistakes. And whether it is, decision of whether to send a guy or not send a guy at third base, or whether it's to keep a kid or cut a kid, it's never perfect. And, it's why I hated doing it so much. And yeah, somebody like Scott was one of those kids that it was like, this really turned out awesome. And there's other kids too. I mean, I could go through, there was a kid named Nick Neese my first year at Vianney, and I mean, almost cut him. And I can still remember there was a day in batting practice where I'm throwing BP to him, and as my son used to always joke around, he goes, "You can throw a mean cutter sometimes." And I always said, I wish I could throw it when I was actually playing, because I might have stuck around a little bit longer. Yeah. And he had 10 pitches in the batting cage, and he missed all 10 of them. I mean, it was just one of those things. He was a lefty, and the last day of practice, I mean, we went in, and he was on the cut list, and all of a sudden he hits a home run in our inter-squad game and stuff. I'm like, well, I can't really cut him on that one. And he ended up being our right fielder for us that year. And so I've learned that, there is no exact science to it. You do the best you can as a coach, and you get a lot of input from your other coaches as well too. And that was always important for me, because it was never just my decision. It was always in conjunction with all the other coaches of what they thought as well too. Because I didn't want to miss something on a kid.
How do you? We talked about kind of the guys that are on the bubble, but how do you manage those big name guys, the ones that when they walk in the hallway their freshman year, like, that's probably going to be a D1 dude? How do you manage those egos?
The nice thing is that some of the ones that were the better ones that we had, they were humble enough, and usually the good players, very few of them are that cocky where they're going to come in and just, they're
not Johnny Manziel.
Yeah, no, they're not. And I've never had those kids, and they knew that really wasn't what I was about either. And it was about being a good teammate. And the thing is that it was always trying to treat them a little bit with kid gloves as well too, because, I go back to somebody like a Luke Mann, and Luke came in and, ironically was not a hitter for us as a freshman. I knew that he was going to eventually be a good hitter, but his big thing was pitching. But the thing I told him is, I said, Luke, I'm going to tell you right now. I said, you are going to be limited to 75 pitches. I go, I don't care where you are. I don't care if it's in the first inning, the second inning. I don't care if it's in the middle of an at-bat. I go, when you hit 75, you will come out. I said, because I am not going to be the person that somebody looks at and goes, oh, you ruined that kid's arm by over-pitch him as a freshman. And I knew that was a good number based on his size. And there was, what he learned to throw more strikes, because the first couple of games that he threw, I think he was like in the third or fourth inning and had to get taken out. And he learned that if I want to stay in longer, then I better make sure I throw more strikes. And so that was one of the things. It was having the respect to treat him with respect and challenge him to see what he could do. Same thing with the Chris Cornelius. It was funny. There was always, as a coach, you always sort of try to pair things up in inter-squad games to where it works out the way you want. And sometimes it is making sure somebody has a little bit more success because you want to give them the confidence, whether it's on the mound or at the plate. Other times it is, well, let's just challenge him and see what he can do. And that was with Chris. I can still remember we were inside at a facility and we were doing live VP, and it was like, all right, what do you think? Because he looks like he knows what he can do in here. He holds himself well. So they're like, well, why don't you put him against some of our lower end pitchers? I'm like, no. I go, because I don't care what he can do about them. I don't care what he can do against those guys. What I want to see is when we play, the CBCs or the better teams in the state, I want to see what he can do if he really deserves to be up here. And so I put him in against Nick Allgaier. And I know he didn't get a hit, but he looked comfortable up there, and I knew at that point that he was good enough to be able to be with us as a freshman. Now, he ended up playing third base more. He eventually played shortstop, but I wanted to take some of the pressure off. And the same thing with Brock Daniels, who's now at Oklahoma. I mean, as a freshman, he played third base for us. It was a need that we had. We had a kid that could play shortstop. And I just didn't want to put that pressure on him as a freshman. I knew eventually that's where he would be, but I didn't want to put the pressure on him then as a freshman.
Do you create different environments to test those players from not just like on a on-field standpoint, but just in a training standpoint?
I think it's just seeing how they sort of interact with the other kids. You know, the good players have good interaction with the other teammates. You know, they're going to talk with them in respect. I sort of see how they look at other kids and how they look at some of the seniors, to see if they're going to learn from them or if they think they know everything. I think that's some of the biggest things I would do. You know, I was told a long time ago that the key to coaching isn't necessarily how you can get those lower end kids to sort of challenge themselves to be a little bit better. It is making sure in the big games that the big time players are able to play at a big time level. And that is a hard thing to do, because it's getting them to feel comfortable out there to where they can perform at the level they can. And we would talk about that all the time. I would constantly have talks with players, Luke Mann and stuff, about, you know, I do have more expectations on you because you have more talent than other people. You know, I expect this from you because, you know, I can't expect this from this player because he doesn't have the ability that you have. You have the ability. Now it's making sure you live up to that ability. Same thing with Chris Cornelius. Chris used to always ask me as a young player, he goes, you know, he always wanted to play shortstop in college. And he goes, do you think I can play shortstop? I said, I don't know yet. I said, it's one of those things I go, I don't know if you can right now. He said, what do you mean? You know, because it was sort of taken aback, because Chris did have a lot of confidence in himself, and he needed
that ego came out.
He did, and he deserved to have the confidence in himself. But I said, here's the deal, Chris. I said, for you to play shortstop in college, you have to make the play to your right on a lot more consistent basis. I go, if you can't make the play to your right, you can't play college shortstop. I said, because that's what they expect you to make. Going to your left is something that almost every one of them can make. But going to the hole, going to your right is what's going to make or break you. And, you know, there'd be things that, and I know that I would irritate him to no end at times, and probably piss him off quite a bit. But he'd sit there, there'd be a play that would be to his right as a junior and stuff, and he didn't quite get to it and stuff, or couldn't quite throw him out. You know, get to the ball, but he couldn't throw him out. I'm like, yeah, that's the play right there. And he'd, you know, look at me and sort of walk away and stuff. And it was just my way of saying, look, that's the one that you talk about. That's if you want to be at that level, that's what you have to do. So it's up to you to make sure you keep on working at that. And I can also remember as he got to a senior and he made a couple plays to his right, I'm like, okay, you keep on making those plays, you have a chance.
You got something, yeah.
Yeah, I go, you've got a chance. And then I can still remember one day at practice, we had the turf his senior year, and there was plays I knew that we could make on the turf that at most places you wouldn't be able to do. And there was a play that I saw Michael Bernal from Arkansas make, where he goes up the middle behind second base back and probably on the second base side of it, and he sort of slid, surrounded the ball, popped up, and made the play. And I'm like, and I had it on video because it was on Twitter, and I showed Chris. I said, this right here. I go, this is a play you need to be able to make on this field. And he's like, look at me. And he's like, I'm like, no, seriously, that's one. I go, a college shortstop. He just made that play. I said, if you're a college shortstop, I said, you should be able to make that play too. And I know there was a day of practice that we were doing that. And I am sure he was cussing me out left and right, because he was just a sweaty mess at the end after about 20 minutes of really working at it and making the play. But he made about 4 plays like that his senior year. And what I texted him when he got drafted by the Phillies. Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah, the Phillies. He got drafted by the Phillies. And Mizzou put out a highlight video of him and put it on Twitter. And the very first thing on there is him making a play up the middle, surrounding the ball, popping up and throwing him out at first base. And I'm like, hey, I go, remember that day that we worked at that? I go, that's the play that's on your highlight video at Mizzou. He goes, I know.
He carried that work ethic over, and it was fun to be around him because he was on a mission, and ended up rewarding with the draft at the end of the day. But
yeah.
he was fun to be around.
How do high school coaches and college coaches communicate with one another? I know how it is on the club end, but from the spring season, because they're playing, How do you get players to get noticed for them? Is it more of just direct communication? Is it more they reach out to you first? How does that work out?
Well, for me, it all starts out, we have a parent meeting with them in the fall. And this is everybody in the program. It was from freshmen through seniors and stuff. And and one of the things I always stress to them is that it's never too early to start. You've got if this is something that you want to do, you have to be proactive, and you've got to go out there and you got to start seeking those places out, especially the ones that you really want to go to. If you want to go to Mizzou, then go to their camp. I said, you have to understand. I go, so take this off the table that, yes, the stuff that you hear about them being a little bit of a money grab is, yeah, maybe it is. I said, but here's the thing. If it's where you really want to go, then you need to be seen by them. I said, and be proactive. And I said, for lack of a better term, view it this way. You're a used car salesman, and your son is the used car, and he's got to sell himself to those colleges that that's where he wants to go and that he's good enough to play there. And it doesn't have to be anything great. They're going to be able to see something if you send a quick email to them that they open up, put a little highlight video on there that maybe is a minute long or something. If they like what they see in that minute, they're going to look for more. And if they don't, then they're going to move on. And that's okay, I tell them. I go, because as I tell them, I said, you have to understand is that you're going to hear no, but eventually you're going to hear yes. And I said the same thing. I said, don't get upset because there's a lot of schools that would love to have you that you're going to say no to as well. I said, so it works both ways. For me, with the college coaches, I guess I was a little bit fortunate because for doing it for so long and having so many players that moved on, I probably, and I was always honest with them. I mean, if a kid didn't deserve to play at that level, I would tell him that he wasn't good enough to play at their level. But if they knew somebody else that was out there, then, pass his name along. But I think I probably had, if I talked to somebody about a kid, they at least would listen a little bit more and would react on a little bit more. So I guess was fortunate that way.
So you had the kids proactively promote themselves, then Pratt would probably get wind of it and then come to you and be like, hey, what's up with this kid?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a two-way street too. The guys would reach out to us, and then we would reach out to them, or they would reach out to us right off the bat and say, "Hey, you need to come see this dude. He's really getting to where he needs your level," type of thing. So it works both ways. And there's a lot of guys like Scott around the area, around the state, around the region. You create those relationships as college coaches, and obviously time over the years, you can learn to respect the guys that give you the honest answers. And know what you want to hear. Yes, this guy's probably a good fit for you. No, he's probably not. He's probably a good fit for here. So it's a two-way street.
So it's almost like you lean in more towards the person like, yeah, this guy shoots me straight.
Absolutely. The honesty, communication is certainly the best when it comes to trying to figure out who's a good fit for your program.
So would you ever recommend players to, like, if they said, oh, I want to play at Mizzou, Vanderbilt, North Carolina, South Carolina, like they just come out with like 5 hot ones, right? Would you ever say, probably shouldn't pick one of those camps? You probably should go maybe to a UCM or an Emporia State. And again, those are really strong Division II programs.
Yes, and they are. And I would try to encourage them sometimes that maybe they're looking at the wrong level for it and stuff. But I also learned that learned long ago to leave that up to the kid. I'm gonna straight shoot with the player. I'm going to tell him that I'll do what I can for him. I said, and I will tell him that if I think he's maybe barking up the wrong tree. But I've also learned that sometimes, as a coach, maybe they're looking for things that are different than what you are looking for or that you see. And I'll go back to a kid named Jamie Clancy, who ended up then coaching his nephew as well, too. But Jamie was a kid when I was at CBC back in '94 that really wanted to play Division I. And he was 5'6", 5'7", maybe at the most, and probably if he really got wet was about 150 pounds. But he really wanted to play, and I was like, Jamie, I said, you can play college baseball. I just don't think that you're fit for that level. And I can remember calling his dad up one day and sort of saying, look, I want you to make sure you're there for him because I don't think it's going to happen. I said, I'm not going to say it won't, but I really don't think it will. I go, but he has a chance to play, and I'd hate for him to pass up on some opportunities. And his dad goes, well, he goes, I appreciate your honesty and stuff. He goes, but we really think that Jamie can play, and we're going to continue to pursue it. I said, okay. And I go, and if you need my help, I'll definitely do it. They had family out in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia, and St. Joe's was a Division I place that maybe wasn't all that good at the time, but they were still Division I, and he ended up going out there and ended up playing 4 years. He was on the team for 4 years. I think he started his senior year, maybe some of his junior year as well too. And I learned at that point that, I can give people my opinion of what I think of them, but ultimately it's their decision of whether they want him or not. I'll try to be as honest as I can. But if a kid really wants something and he really works hard at it, as far as looking, there's always places for him.
Yeah, they're the captain of their own ship, right?
Exactly.
You're just you're just trying to direct traffic almost at that point.
Exactly. And so it's not my job to say, definitely yes or no, you can or can't. I said, because, for him, it was, I don't think he got much money out there, if any. I don't know that. But he just wanted to be able to play out there, and they had a spot for him, so it worked out well for him.
Now, have you ever had a player where they've came to camp and then you told them, I don't think that you can play here, and then they end up playing there?
I can't remember a whole lot of kids with that scenario.
Yeah.
If so, then we would have to go watch them in games after camp.
Mm-hmm.
But I can't remember one that specifically off the top of my head with that scenario, no.
Okay.
And they're at a little bit different level, too. I mean, they're at a place where, for a high school kid, you're talking about, when you start seeing them as young, they're still growing. They're still learning. Maybe they haven't had a chance to really focus on baseball very much, or they haven't had much coaching. So there's a lot of room for growth there. When you get to Division I level, it's more about refining things. They've already got we'll talk about hitters and stuff here. They've already got a swing that they really feel comfortable with that works for them. So it's sort of fine tuning that, tweaking it a little bit to really make it better. So they're already at a much higher level than the high school kids.
What I always try to tell the kids too now, I'll be on this side, get to the point where you have a good relationship with that college coach, and ask them questions. Let them tell you yes or no, because that's their job. They'll tell you yes or no. Most of them are. All of them are pretty honest as all get out when that comes to that part of it. So I'm going to tell you, you're probably not going to be a good fit for me. But you know what? There's a program down the street that I know this guy. You want me to help? I'll call him for you. So it may not work with me, but I will help you get to. Baseball's a small community, obviously, coaching-wise. Everybody pretty much knows everybody. Or if not, they just pick up the phone and you start having conversations. But we're all in the business, I believe, to help kids get to that next level. Mm-hmm. If it didn't work for us at camp, we saw them, or we went out and recruited them, you know what? I'll help you get, whatever you need, I'll help you do it. Same thing with the high school guys. They do a great job of doing that. It's kind of how I try to do it as well, too, is if a kid wants to play, there is a place for you to play. There's an option somewhere. You just have to keep digging and clawing to find that.
And that goes back, to add to that one, I'll take a step further, is I think the reason I was able to play with the Pirates for a little bit was simply because I think it was Jim Turner. He was a scout, I believe, for the Braves at the time, and it was one that he was from the St. Louis area, so I've known him for quite a while and stuff, and it was one of the things where I really wanted to have a chance to play, and I would bug him, and even after my senior year in college at Illinois State, I didn't get drafted, and I'm back playing for the Sauget Wizards, and I'm pitching pretty good. He was there watching one of the college kids that was playing, and I'm like, look, I really want to have a chance. I said, he's like, well, he goes, and I showed up at a open tryout, which I don't even think they have them anymore.
I don't think they do them anymore.
And it was and he looked at me and goes, what are you doing here? I'm like, I told you, I just want to have a chance. And it was about a week later that he was up in Chicago area, and there's a guy named Bill Brick that was with the Pirates, and they were sitting at a game and talking and asking who they were looking at and stuff, and Bill's like, yeah, I guess I need to find a pitcher because we have a roster fill spot. And he's like, well, I got a kid in St. Louis that I know really wants to have a chance. And, he'd be perfect for you guys. And that's how I ended up getting signed. It wasn't because I was this super talented baseball player. I had a little bit of ability, but I had a lot of determination, and fortunately was able to bug people enough to give me a chance.
Would you guys say that this is a fair statement that players have to be developed to a certain point to play at the Division I or professional level? They don't want, those coaches don't want to develop certain skill sets. You have to have a baseline before you can actually play there. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I think it's part of it, especially at the higher levels of Division One.
Because like where I'm coming from is that parents and coaches, I've heard these conversations in the stands like, well, why don't they just pick him up? He's going to develop. Like, that's what their job is. They have to develop the kid. Can you kind of like expand on that? Like how that's like not a really good thought process.
Well, especially at the higher Division One levels, those guys anymore with coaches' salaries, facilities, it gets back to the bottom line, and that's winning baseball games. And at that level, Big 12, SEC, Big 10, PAC, whatever, those guys need to win baseball games or you're not going to be coaching at those schools. So you can't really take that project kid like you probably could a while back and develop them. And you see the guy can hit it 1,000 miles, but he stands on his head and hits. Well, he can hit it 1,000. I'm going to teach him how to really hit. Well, you can't really. You don't have the time to do that anymore.
So it's not like
these
you're going
days.
to pick up like, oh, he's 6'4", he throws 85. I was like, well, I mean that's good, but like I have like 10 other dudes that throw 90.
Yeah. You can tell the guys that are going to develop and the guys you want, and you can see, okay, that guy's going to be a pretty good player. I just need to tweak this, that, or the other. If you recruit a guy and you have to overhaul him, he's probably not the guy for you at that level. The other places, maybe. But at that level, probably not. You can afford to have 2 or 3 of those development, quote unquote, development guys, maybe at a different level. But you need the guys at that level, need guys ready to play, ready to step in and go. What we did up there, we would want to regenerate with freshmen. That was our whole thing, is to regenerate. We had a reset in 2002, and we just literally put 3 freshmen on the mound, had a freshman catcher. And we said, okay, we're going to go. That was our plan. We literally, we're going to 3 freshmen, freshman catcher. They took their lumps.
That's scary.
It was awesome. It was great. Those guys were really determined and really good. But it turned out that's when our run started at Mizzou. In 2003, we went to 7 straight regionals because we just said, okay, we're going to get the young player, the good dude, and regenerate with that younger player. And it worked for us. We didn't want to get the JUCO or the older or whatever transfer, whatever it is, but we got those freshman dudes, and they were the start of it, and we took off from there. So we had some development guys right off the start, but then we ended up getting the guys that come in behind them that were good players that weren't developmental guys because we had it going, and all of a sudden we're generating with good players, not guys we have to, okay, we spend this 3 months to do this and this and that. We didn't have time to do that. We needed to win some baseball games.
So are you conscious of like how the roster is made up from like a mix of junior college and freshmen?
Absolutely. I mean, you want that younger player to get in there because if that younger player gets in there and plays, now you got that guy for 3 years. He may be a draft guy his 3rd year. You want 2 or 3 good years out of that player. You can let him get in there as a freshman if he fits. Let him get burned. Let him figure it out. And then you got that player for 2 or 3 years as opposed to you don't know what you're going to get with a junior college guy at the higher levels. They have good players, but they haven't been on TV against LSU. They haven't gotten under those lights yet. So you don't know how they're going to react. But if that guy's gone through the fire for you earlier, you know what kind of player that you have. So those are the type of guys that you kind of wanted to keep going, keep the cycle moving. And again, you're going to get some JUCO guys. And now obviously the transfer portal is a little bit different these days, and you can kind of get at that experienced guy now. So it's a little bit different now. But when you got that younger guy in there, then you had a player for a good chunk of – now you know you got your third baseman for 2 years. You don't have to really go out and find another guy.
Yeah, because
I got my guy.
You could get burned if you go all junior college because that guy could get drafted the next year.
Right, or he could flame out, one or the other.
Yeah, and you're looking for 1 year. And not only that, but not only are you looking for the depth as far as who can do what at that level, but it's also, you put the dynamics in there with money as well, too, as far as scholarships. And you're having to play a completely unbelievable game as far as the college coaches. I mean, it's more than just coaching baseball at that level. It is also being able to figure out how to manipulate the roster with not only the talented players, but also I got scholarship. I need this hole filled right away. Do I go with a freshman? Will he be good enough? Do I have a guy that's good enough for that? And that's where, junior college, sometimes you do try that, but it's, but take it a step further, even from the Division I level. I was talking to one of the scouts last year, and it was the kid from out at Liberty, and I know he was signed with Oregon State, and it was one that he could throw 90. He hit 98. but he also really had a lot of trouble with mechanics. And I knew he had one good game in there during the season. I was like, well, have you seen him yet? And, what do you think of him and stuff? Like, yeah. He goes, the way things are with the analytics now, he goes, we won't touch him. He goes, in the past, he goes, yes, we would. He goes, but now with analytics, he goes, that we're going with, he goes, nobody will touch him because they want somebody that is able to throw strikes a lot more consistently.
They gotta see more.
Yeah, they do. I mean, and the same thing, for me, it's hoping to get them to a level. And, as far as you talked about with the development, is they have to be at a certain level already. It's not just starting from ground zero. I'm up here at level 7 or 8. Now can we get them up to a 9 or 10? That's what Division I levels are doing.
And that's where the importance of a good high school program and a good club program really come into play, because you have to develop those players to get to that point.
And you also have to have a kid who is self-driven, and that's one of the most
that's
important
probably
things.
100% of the mix right there.
You got to have a
1%.
kid that is self-driven to actually do the work that is being taught to him. I mean, you can have all the best coaches, but if you have a kid that isn't driven to actually succeed and do things on his own, then it's not going to happen.
Is there a way to get that drive out of the kid, or do you think that's literally it's a timing mechanism, just waiting and waiting?
Go back to the meeting that I have with the parents and players in the fall. And one of the things I tell them is I lay out, and I tell them that if they're going to play another sport, perfect. I go, I'm not going to bug them during that sport. If they want to be involved in some of the weightlifting, then they have to have permission from the other coaches that they're playing for. I said, but here's the thing. For those that are not, I go, this is what's offered. I go, and I actually had the entire calendar laid out for the entire off season as far as the days that we'd be lifting and everything. And we'd always do it from 6 to 7 in the morning. And I tell them, I said, I know that this is a commitment. I know that this is not easy. I said, trust me, I'm not necessarily a morning person either. I go, but it's the most convenient time to do it because after school, it's just too crowded. People don't want to do that. I said, but I'm going to tell you this. If you have to beg your son, or if with the softball players that are probably listening out here too, if you have to beg your son or daughter to get in the weight room and do the stuff they're supposed to, stop. Don't, because they're not going to get enough out of it, and you're just going to cause pain and headache for the coaches. And I would tell them that. I go, because if they don't want to be there, they're going to sit there and they're going to whine and moan that while they're there, that their mom or dad made them go, that they got them up, they would much rather be sleeping right now, and they're not going to get the work in that everybody else is, and they're just going to be a detriment in there. And in the end, they're either helping themselves or they're not. And so you have to be self-driven, and that's sometimes. You see a lot of kids, and maybe you don't, well, you do as well too. A lot of kids who have the talent but don't have the drive, don't have the mental makeup to actually make it happen. Best arms in baseball are probably in single A, but they just don't have the mental makeup to make it the rest of the way to actually get over that hump.
Is there a way to get that person to think differently, or is it just like it's a lost cause, like it's just they have to figure it out on their own?
You try, you encourage them. But eventually, it has to come from within.
So you show the resources. You show, and I love this analogy. It's like I can show the water to the horse, but the horse has got to drink the water.
Exactly.
You keep dragging them along, and eventually, most of them do. And then there's a handful of just not going to do it.
Just not there.
And you're just not going to do it. And it's kind of easy to see those guys too. It's easy to you're not going to do it. You can just tell. You just watch. You literally go to any baseball game at a high school and follow and just look at the dugout and how the people reacted and talk or just be with each other in the dugout. You can tell which guys are really getting it, which guys are dialed into the game, which guys are I don't know what's going on. I mean, they're not interested.
Yeah, you can always tell like the kid who's always the first one out of the dugout to give high fives and everything. Like, oh yeah, that kid's locked in. Mm-hmm. He's definitely locked in.
And when the good players are also the leaders in that area, then you got something special,
How do you manage your coaching staff? I know that's a very big subject for a lot of youth coaches and obviously high school coaches. How do you manage your coaching staff and picking those guys and then obviously making sure that everyone's on the same page?
I was very fortunate that I had a really great staff over at Vianney. When I was at CBC, it was a struggle. I mean, so a lot of the stuff that, you were sort of alluding to with there, it was a struggle because it was, it was getting somebody from inside, and we just didn't have anybody from the inside. And it was sort of, there was a period where it was only one assistant, and it was probably changing every year for about 6 straight years. And when I got to Vianney, it was a lot more consistency. I was fortunate. I had Steve Ollenberg, who was my pitching coach for a number of years, that actually coached over at WashU, was a head coach at Fort Zumwalt South when they first opened up. I had Neil Fiala, who was a longtime coach over at SWIC, that was done coaching over there, and he was a graduate of Vianney. He just wanted to help out, and I've known him and played with him for a long time. A kid named Eric Rule, who is a graduate of Vianney that runs the Southside Prospects, who just loves coaching. He had a kid named, he had Matt Sapicki, who played in the big leagues. I mean, Neil played in the big leagues. Matt played in the big leagues. He was a graduate of Vianney as well, too. He helped out with our hitters. And
how did you attract those guys?
Ask them.
Just straight up ask them.
Seriously, it's one of those things where the one thing I've learned over the years is that it drives my kids nuts. As far as my 2 boys, it's I'm never afraid to ask or try to see if a door is unlocked. I can still remember going down to Vanderbilt, and my youngest son was playing hockey down there, and Matt and I were looking around at the field and the facility and stuff, and I'm like, hey, there's the basketball arena right there. It's right by the baseball. And he's like, well, do you think we ought to call someone? I'm like, no, I don't know who to call. I go, let's just see if it's open. And it was open. And he's like, are we supposed to be in here? I'm like, well, if we're not supposed to be in here, it would have been locked. And, it ended up finding the baseball facility, got to look around there and stuff. And so it's sort of the same with the coaches. I mean, I sort of talked to them and asked them if they wanted to help out. And some of them reached out to me. Some of them I reached out to. And, the one thing I think that is important for young coaches to know is don't be intimidated by other coaches. Don't think that you know everything, and you can always learn a lot from other people. I mean, I've been doing it long enough to where, people always ask me, well, what was it like coaching with Neil? And Neil's a person that's been around St. Louis baseball forever. And I'm like, it's been great. I go, we have a great relationship. And, the thing also is to let them coach. I think that's the most important thing.
Giving them freedom.
Yeah. And, I can still remember there was Darren Scott from Lindbergh and Tim Odie from Melville were playing a game at our place. And it was in a tournament game, and we were going to practice afterwards because we had not played that day. And I happened to have our sophomores as well, too. And when we would get after at practice, literally, I used to do the middle infielders, and when Neil came around, since he played in the big leagues in the middle infield, I figured, I'll let him do that. So I would do with the third baseman. He would go with the middle infielders. I had Scott Hingle over with the first baseman. Brandon Schlichtig was with the catchers. Eric Rule was with the outfielders, and then Steve Ollenberg was with the people who were POs, and they were working on things. And we were all on different parts of the turf and all doing our own little thing. And it was, I gave them the guidance of what we needed to work on that particular day, but then how they did the drills and stuff was up to them. And it was one of the things where they're like, so did you just do that to show off for us or what? I go, no, that literally is how we do practice every day. It's getting them to just get a little bit better, focus on the fundamentals, make sure they're comfortable with that, because really in the end, baseball is, can you feel the ball, can you throw a ball? And the more practice you get with that and putting them in different positions, the better off they're going to be able to handle those things in games. And so that's what we did. And it was, the coaches loved the fact that I gave them that freedom. It was, we'd always talk about things, and in the end, if there was something I really wanted, I would tell them that. But, I also was smart enough to know that there's more than one way to do it, and my way doesn't always have to be the best way. It just happens to be my way. Their way may be just as good, if not better. So trust them with that.
It's crazy how simple the game actually is. Like, can you throw? Can you catch? And can you make contact? And if you can do that 90 to 100% of the time, you're going to be playing this game for a pretty long time, where sometimes we kind of overcomplicate it with the whole lessons and training and all of that, where it's just literally, can you throw, can you catch, and can you make contact?
Yeah.
and how good can you make contact?
I mean, you may be in different situations and stuff, but again, I mean, defensively, it's getting them to feel comfortable and knowing that, this is putting in those situations where when it happens in a game that they've at least done it before. It goes back to the play with Chris Cornelius. I know that was a play that he never would have dreamed of making, but it was something we practiced. And it was, there's days that we would have the shortstop working on jump throws from the shortstop pull and stuff. It was fun for them, but it was also like, maybe you'll have a chance to make it. Maybe you won't, but maybe you will. I go back to an interview that they had with Dustin Pedroia, and there was a play, and I don't remember who they were playing, but it was a bunt to the pitcher. Pitcher throws away down the first base line. He happens to be backing up the first baseman, and he talked about that, that was one thing that they take pride in, of being in the right spot all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And that it's a play where he's there probably 500 other times that it didn't make any difference whatsoever. That one time happened to be where the ball got thrown away. He was right there, and then they backpicked the guy at first base.
It was in Texas. I remember the interview.
Yeah.
They were playing the Rangers.
Yeah.
Well, it's like that. It's like
I
that
remember that
cheater
one.
play with Oakland A's where
Right.
you got
Yeah.
Giambi at the home plate. It's like majority of the time that play never happens, and then it happened.
Yeah, and again, it's I would every fall, and Evan would remember this and stuff. Every fall, I would call up places and go look, the Division I places. I'm like, can I come and watch a practice? I don't want to see inter squad. I want to see an actual practice because I want to see what you guys do. Because one, I wanted to see what they're doing. Because I wanted to make sure that if there's different skill sets that they're teaching those kids now, or when I've talked to my players that have gone on, I did constantly question them of how they're teaching them different things. But I wanted to make sure that I was passing it on to our kids because I wanted them to be better as well too. And it was sort of, can I justify what I'm doing with my practices, or are there things that I need to tweak? And
So the coaches were actually okay with you being like,
oh God, yeah,
All the time.
No
It was
way.
awesome.
Really?
Yeah,
So,
guys
like-
like him would come.
So
and
if a high school coach called you and be like, "Hey, can I show up to practice?" You didn't think it was a nuisance. It was just like, "Yeah, that's pretty."
come
that's
on
pretty-
down on the field. I'll just come stand
Oh,
right
it
next
was.
to me. Come on.
It
was
was
awesome.
No way.
That was what was awesome. It was because they were like, "Hey, you can come down here if you want." I'm like, "Well, I'm just sort of taking this all in." The first couple times I did it, and then there was a couple times.
Hey, you
that
want
we
a
would
hat?
come-
You want a jersey? We got pants over here.
But there's times that I would come down there, and it was I could certainly, and Steve last year, because it was my assistant coach, and talking to Fred Corral, down there as a pitcher's on a bullpen, and just talking about what are you trying to do right here, and it's like this is what I'm trying to do, and it was when Butler was there as well too. I mean, he was a guy that I knew from recruiting my son at Arkansas, and I mean. He was just telling me what his philosophy was. It was awesome. And the same thing. I mean, when, with the coaches down at Arkansas, when Matt was down there, I would go down there and watch practices as well too. And, I love practices. I mean, games are fun, but they're more for the kids. The practices are the things that I really took a lot of joy in.
It's almost like coaching is more. The game is just there for coaches. It's like, yeah, I got to press the right buttons and put guys in the right position, but majority of your work, like going back to the original part of this conversation, was I got to have conversations with my players and then working all the way through practice. Like that's where I really make my money, quote unquote, is at practice.
And it's where you see things starting to click. I mean, where you lay the groundwork, then all of a sudden it happens in a game, and you're like, look, that's what we've been talking about. There you did it. And that's the part that's really fun. When you see a kid, when it starts clicking for a kid, that's when you really know that coaching is just an unbelievable experience. I mean, you see that smile on their face, and there's nothing better than that.
Yeah, it's just like a complete unlock. And it's like literally the whole weight of the world just like completely goes away. Obviously being there as players, but then as coaches, it's a totally different experience. It's pretty cool. Nutrition. I want to go down nutrition because you're working for First Phorm, and this is a very touchy subject in the sports realm. In the second part of this conversation, we talk about nutrition. More importantly, we touch on the subject of supplements. Now, this is a touchy subject because of the steroid era in the late 90s and in the early 2000s. But I don't want to shy away from it. I think it's something that a lot of players need to hear. And when we know the information, it'll help us make better decisions rather than kind of just shying away from it and not knowing what it is. So kind of thinking about this subject, I've been wanting to do this type of conversation for a while, and realizing that Scott works at Phorm and also being a man I respect on the baseball diamond and who has had unbelievable success at the high school level and has played pro ball, I wanted to get him in the room and really talk about this subject. So we do talk about supplements, but a lot I'll kind of catch to the chase is that he really dives into what are the building blocks of a strong nutrition plan. What's going to be able to give you the energy level so that you can make it through a game or even a doubleheader. Like, we've all been there where we have been on turf in the month of July and it feels like it's 150 degrees on that turf. How do you actually survive that day? Not just survive, but actually perform at an extremely high level. Well, Scott kind of gives you the building blocks of what you need to do and what you should focus on. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and I can't wait for you guys to hear the second episode, which is going to be coming out this Tuesday or next Tuesday. And if you're 10 years in the future, just go ahead and click over. All right. Thanks, guys. See ya.